Hey everybody, this is Fry. So today we are going to be talking about how to build decks in PvZ Heroes. So first of all, do not think that you need all the expensive cards in the game, all the legendaries and the super rares, and have this huge collection in order to build basic decks. You basically just have to follow these steps. You can make really great decks even if you don't have a lot of cards. There's some even really good decks that you can make even if you don't have a single rare card in it. There's actually one deck, maybe I'll show you that a little bit later. So I'm just going to go through the basic steps and how to build a deck, and let's just get right to it. I'm going to start off by going into our collection here, and I'll show you the first thing I want to talk about is having, number one, have early game in your deck. You cannot just have a lot of really strong, expensive cards in your deck. You need the early game, and there's two main reasons why. First of all, if you just have all these really expensive cards in your deck and you don't have enough early game I'm talking about here are cards that cost 1 or 2, maybe 3. If you don't have enough of those, your opponent is going to get so far ahead in the game, and they are going to have this huge board full of all these small minions, and then you're going to start playing your big ones, and you're actually just going to fall behind and usually die by the time you can really develop your big minions. So usually you want to have about 15 early game cards in your deck, so 15 cards that cost 1 or 2. That's kind of a good gauge. There are a lot of decks that you run a lot more. There's decks that you can run as many as 28 1 or 2 drops. We'll talk about those decks in a little bit. For example, and if you want just some simple early game, I'm going to try to keep this tutorial at first with the really basic cards, so the really inexpensive cards. It'll be cards that, probably you guys all have. Very early on in your gaming experience. Let's say you're just playing the Kabloomy class. Shroom for 2. That's a great card. Yeah, I'll show you what this does really quickly. When you play it, it makes 2 little mushrooms, and then you can kind of come in the next turn. Hopefully you have this in your hand. You have Buff Shroom. Buff Shroom makes all your little mushrooms get 1/1. So basically on the board you end up having 3 decent-sized creatures. Basically try to have 15 cards in your deck there, 1 or 2. There's another reason also that it's good to have early game. The early game cards help support your later game cards later. For example, I'll bring up the Hardy class just to give this example. Pretty decent example here. Okay, here's the Hardy class. Let's just say it is turn. Let's just say it's turn 5. Yeah, and you don't have necessarily a card that costs 5 in your hand. And let's say you have a bucket zombie in your hand. So you play 4, now you have 1 brain left, so what are you going to do with that extra brain? So if you have a trick, like Rolling Stone, something like that, you can remove one of your opponent's minions, and that just really puts you further ahead on the board. Now you have minions on the board and your opponent doesn't. That's really what you're trying to do in this game in order to take the advantage. You can just play your Buckethead, for example, for 4, and if you have an extra brain, you can stick a Arm Wrestler on the field, which is just getting you more ahead. So that's having early game. Next thing I want to talk about is have late game or card draw. And I'm saying late game or card draw. Almost every single deck is going to have a late game in it. Late game, I'm talking about cards that cost 3, really late game starts 4, 5, maybe even 6. That's sort of the late game, the staple that you have to have plenty of those in every single deck, and there's 2 reasons for that too. First of all, a lot of decks need finishers, so having the big cards, I'll give you examples, some really good examples of finishers. I'll give you my favorite maybe finishers for the Beastie class and which will be for the zombies, and then for the plants, I'll give you another one. Here's Surprise Gargantuar. This is a basic card. You guys, if you play this game for a little bit, you will definitely get this card. You don't even need to open up any premium packs to get it. It costs 5, it's 5, and it has Frenzy. Frenzy means that when it kills a minion, it keeps on breaking through. It's a really hard card to stop unless they have some card that really just removes it right off the board. Good to have these as finishers. I'll show you another great finisher, and that's, of course, if any of you guys have watched me before, the awesome finisher in the Solar class is going to be my good friend, Power Flower. This is a good card. Look at this. Doesn't do as much damage. If you just look stat-wise, it doesn't look as beefy as that Smashing Gargantuar, which was a 5/5. This is a great finisher, though, because having the 3 damage and strike through, not only does it keep you alive, because as you can see, it has a little bit of healing power, but it will strike through. Your opponents will try to stick minions in front of it, and it'll just keep on hitting face. So if you've worn down your opponents enough, having strike through, for an example, is a great example of a good finisher. There's a lot of strike through. We'll get to the strike through strategies in a little bit. We're actually going to feature a strike through deck in this tutorial. Any cards that are big, I could just give you another example. Here's a Vine Whip. It's also costs 5, does 5/5, nice beefy card, moves a zombie out of the way, so just in case you need to really finish them off with that 5 damage, their zombies are not in the right places, you can go and manipulate one. The other thing that I really want to emphasize about having late game, though, is that you don't want to run out of cards. I can't overemphasize how much card advantage plays into this game. For example, if you would have a deck that's just tons of really great little cards, for example, all these PvZs, these are really, really good, Black Eyed Peas, you could have, you know, Flaming and Growing and all kinds of like really, really strong little cards. Eventually, you are going to just totally run out of cards in your hand, because turn 5, in order to really make a good play on turn 5, you're going to have to play 2 or 3 cards out of your hand. You're only drawing really 1 card per turn. So you're going to really run out of cards if you don't have late game. And the only other answer besides having late game is having card draw. Here's a great example. Flourish. Play a card. What does it do? Just draw 2 cards. Most of the card draw for the zombies is in the Brainy class. I'll show you where the Brainy class is. Here's all the Brainy cards, and this is a lot of card draw too. You have Funded Razor, which is basically the same thing, but it's for zombies. Cost 3, draw 2 cards. There's Kite Flyer. This is a rare. This is a good, very, very good, if you need card draw. Draw a card. You don't want a lot of card draw in a deck that anyway you have late game, because then usually you end up, okay, so you have your early game and then you're drawing tons of cards, you have late game, you just have all these extra cards in your hand. The card draw cards are really weak. I mean, just look at Kite Flyer. Besides for the ability that it can draw cards, it's only a 1/3, which is really, really pathetic stats for a 3-drop. So you either want to have, you can have a little bit of card draw and a little bit of late game, but you either basically want to have a lot of late game or a lot of card draw. I'm actually going to let you guys, I'm going to get later in the tutorial to a deck that you have no late game and you just have tons of card draw. I'll show you what that deck is. That's going to be our zoo deck. I'll get to that a little bit later in this tutorial. Alright. So we've covered, you need your early game, you need either late game or tons and tons of card draw in order to make sure you don't run out of cards. Now let's talk about removal. Removal is a really, really important part of every single deck. In order to do removal, I'll go to, well, the Crazy class is a really good one to give examples of removal. So there's a few different types of removal. Let's say there's really 4 categories of removal. First of all, small removal. That would be like this little card. This is Plumber. It costs 1, so it's really inexpensive. It does 2 damage. You can do this damage to your opponent's face. Don't do it to your opponent's face. Do the 2 damage to one of your opponent's minions and take them off. So this can either remove a small minion your opponent plays outright, or if you have a bigger minion that already took a little bit of damage of your opponent, so then you can use this 2 damage just to finish it off. So in the earlier game, maybe you'd be using to destroy a minion. Later in the game, you'd actually want to save this in order to kind of finish off a big beefy minion your opponent has. This is small removal. Another example of small removal, another one I really like, is Rolling Stone. That's for the Hardy class. Destroy a plant with 2 or less. So there are even some powerful minions in the game, plants, let's say, they only have 2 attacks. So this is a pretty decent card. Do you need a lot of small removal in every single deck? The answer is no. This is actually the least important one. You basically want small removal in decks that you're trying to get ahead really, really fast. For example, if your opponent plays a card that costs 2 and has 2 attack, you can remove it through Rolling Stone. Then, hey, I still have another brain left. That turn I could have actually played another card like a minion on the board, like an Arm Wrestler or something like that, and you actually get ahead. So small tricks are more for tempo, getting ahead of your opponent early on. Alright. The second type of removal, and this is probably the most important, is big removal. Big removal means you're trying to do can be a more expensive card, and it does a lot. It either does a lot of damage to one of your opponent's minions, or it removes it completely. Here's an example: Cake Explosion. It costs 4, and it does 4 damage to a plant. So you're using this to remove a stronger plant. You know, you're not going to want to use this on something that only has 1 health, unless it's a really, really big threat on the board. So that's a good example of some big removal. The best kind of big removal is obviously hard removal. So hard removal comes in 2 different forms. One is that it destroys your opponent's creature. I'll show you a card that does that. We'll go to Locust Swarm. There are plant cards that do this too. I'll show you a couple of those after I'm done here. Locust Swarm, destroy a plant for the beastie. Destroys a minion off the board. You need some of these, and I'll tell you why it's really important to have at least 2 of these cards in your deck. You basically want 2 or 3 big hard removal cards in your deck. The reason is because a lot of opponents are going to, first of all, either be playing really big cards eventually in their deck, and they have really strong high health cards that you really have to have some way of dealing with. And they also can sometimes, a lot of your opponents are going to take their smaller creatures and just build them and build them and build them. I'll give you an example of doing that. There's this card called Vitamin Z. Yeah, this Vitamin Z, it costs 3, and it adds 3 attack and 3 health to a minion. So if you would play this on a small card, it could really get so big that you're not, and they can play another Vitamin Z and another one. They can actually build a whole deck that they're just building up one single creature, and there's just none, it's just going to destroy all of your cards. So having some hard removal really prevents them from winning with that strategy, because no matter how many times they buff up Vitamin Z, a hard removal card will just come in and destroy it. I'll show you the equivalent of this for the plants. Every single hero owns only 2 classes, of course, so you have to sort of look in each hero, what is that hero's big removal? What do I have to remove a big plant with? So let's say for the Kabloomy, this would be a big one that does damage, 5, do 5 damage. More importantly though, I would go to the solar class. The solar class has the real hard removal. Hard removal means it just takes an opponent off the board, an enemy creature off the board, regardless of how much attack and health it has. This is the really most efficient one in the game. This is Squash. It's the same as the Locust, really, for these zombies. It costs 5, destroy zombie. It's an expensive card. This costs 5, so you really want to use this. Don't want to use this on a little tiny card. Wait till you use this something big. Lawnmower is sort of the same. Only works on ground lanes, but it's a little less expensive. So, alright. So there's other types of, I'm going to get into a couple different types of big removal too. One of them, we'll take a look at the Smarty class, because they have a thing called Bounce. So first let's look at Jumping Bean. When played, bounce a zombie. So that bounce a zombie obviously means instead of it actually destroying it from the game, it goes from on the board into their hands. This is another type of hard removal, because you're taking it off the board. So if they've built up one of theirs, they either have a huge zombie on the board, or they've taken a small one and really built it up. So you can use this to bounce. There's a lot of decks that bounce really comes into play very well. There's another, this is a plant that you play, like a minion that you play that bounces. There obviously also are tricks that bounce. I'll show you that here real quick. Here it is. This is Spring Bean, bounce a zombie. So you have to, it's a little bit, I'll tell you one thing about bouncing. You gotta be kind of careful bouncing, because when they bounce, obviously can play it back. So you're destroying a card from your hand, the bounce card, and they are able to take this card that they bounce and still get it back in their hand, and that could give them a card advantage. They're going to end up having more cards than you, and if the game goes late enough, that extra fact they have extra cards in their hands is really going to make them win. I'll show you a little bit more about some hard removal here. One of the most efficient, I'd say the most efficient hard removal card in the game, big removal card, is this card right here, Rocket. And this is when you're playing against a brainy zombie. If you're playing a plan against a brainy zombie, you always gotta pay attention. Do they have 3 brains that they're going to be able to rocket one of my cards down? This destroys any plant that has 4 or more, so it only costs 3. That's why it's so efficient. The cost of this card is really low. It obviously will not work on a card. There are some strong cards that have 3 attack, like Power Flower, the one I showed you before. So this only works if it has 4 or more. It's still a very good card. You're really in almost every brainy hero. You basically want to be running 2 of these in basically every single deck, unless it's something very unusual deck. There is another thing that zombies have in terms of hard removal, and you definitely count this as hard removal. First of all, before I show you what Deadly is, I'm going to get to Deadly in a second. Let's just look at this Exploding Imp. This Exploding Imp has 2 functions in the game. Look at this. It's a gravestone. Pops out of the gravestone. It does 6 damage, has 1 health, and at the end of the turn it does 1 health to itself. So there are ways of giving this extra health so it won't die. But basically this has 2 functions. It could be used as a finisher. You need that nice 6 damage burst towards the end of the game to hit your opponent's face in order to finish them off. But usually this is just used as big removal. Think about it. It's a card that costs 3 and it does 6 damage. So if you line this up against one of your opponent's plants that are really strong, a lot of times you can take out one of their huge expensive cards, a card that costs them 5 or 6, and take it out with this little guy. exploding imp. The last thing that the zombies have, and I'll go down to the sneaky class for this, there's another type of big removal that the zombies have, and that is deadly. The best deadly card in the game, I believe, is this one right here, Smelly Zombie. This is a card not only has very good stats, it costs 3, it's a 2/4, it's deadly, meaning anytime your opponent plays, if they played a plant last turn that is really, really strong, you know what to do. If you have the Smelly Zombie in your hand, you can just stick it in front, it's a gravestone, and it will almost always destroy that creature. So having deadly cards are really good. There is this little guy called Toxic Waste Imp that makes all of your imps have deadly. So in there are Toxic Waste Imp decks that you really swarm with a lot of imps and take advantage of this power. In the sneaky class is the one with all the real good removal. There also is bounce. This is trampoline. This bounce is a card. Another example of bouncing, which is hard removal. And there's this little guy right here, Pogo Bouncer. Pogo Bouncer is a minion that after it pops out of the gravestone, it bounces another plant. Really efficient. So that's sort of what we're looking for in terms of big removal. Again, in terms of big removal, you need at least 3 cards, 2 or 3 card big removal cards. There's a lot of decks that you have way more. There's decks you can have as many as 8 big removal cards. Big removal is the most important one. Okay, and we're going to move right along, and we're going to talk about the third type of removal. The third type of removal is called Field Clear. Field Clear is where you play one card and it can destroy or damage many of your opponent's minions. And the best card to start off with when we're talking about Field Clear is one of my favorite cards in the entire game. It is the Chickening. It's for the crazy class, for the zombies. Let me show you what this card does. It costs 4, do 2 damage to each plant. This is a game changer and a game saver. The fact that your opponent can build up this board in turns 1, 2, 3, 4, and just putting all these really swarmy minions on the board, and then you can come with the Chickening and just clear it out. It really prevents your opponent from winning the game if he's really swarming you. It also really prevents your opponent from doing that in the first place. The fact you could always be packing a Chickening in your hand really makes it that your opponent won't try to swarm and just play a bunch of little cheap minions and try to really take over the game that way. I'll show you some other Field Clear. The Field Clear in this game is kind of limited. So the advantage every crazy hero has is Chickening, and every hardy hero has a more expensive card. It is Weed Spray. Take a look at this. This destroys every single plant with 2 or less attacks. So there's some types of, in certain situations that Chickening is way better. For example, if they have minions with high attack and low health, so Chickening, which does 2 damage to each of your opponent's minions, clears their field. If they're doing the opposite, let's say they have really high health plants that they're playing and they have low attack, so then Weed Spray, particularly against nut decks, Weed Spray can really, really clear them out. I'll show you for the plants what's considered to be Field Clear. For the plants, the Field Clear is not as clear for plants. There's obviously this one. This is kind of big removal. This is Doomstream. This is a super rare card and a hard card to use in the deck. Destroys all plants with 4 or more. But I'll get to some more basic ones. Here's a good card for Field Clear. This is Sour Grapes. You play it, it costs 4, it puts a 2/2 minion on the board, and when you play it does 1 damage to each zombie. This is very effective against, again, opponents. If they're a zombie that's playing all these little tiny cards and little tiny imps and trying to swarm you, this is very, very effective in order to get rid of it. Here's a bigger Field Clear. This definitely is Field Clear, Cherry Bomb. You do 4 damage. So you basically place it in a lane and it explodes. It does 4 damage to a zombie in that lane and in the 2 adjacent lanes. So you can actually take out, this is a very good card, you can take out hopefully 3 zombies with this card, or at least, at least take out, even if you take out 2 with a card like that is fine. Let's see what else we can find in terms of Field Clear. I will show you Electric Reed. This has a power called Splash Damage, which means it has 1 attack and 2 health. Whenever it does damage, whenever it hits, it splashes, so it does 1 damage to not only whatever its attack is it does to that lane, it does 1 damage to the 2 lanes right next to it. So that is Field Clear, and probably the much better one though is this card right here, Snapdragon. This is a difficult card to use, but when you use it correctly, it is very effective. It is a 3/1, so it's very fragile, but when it hits, it will splash the damage to 3 lanes. You can very often take out many of your opponent's minions with a single Snapdragon if it can be used correctly. Alright, that's field clear. So, do you need field clear in every single deck? No. Do you have a big advantage if you have field clear? Yes. It happens to be the zombies that are the certain zombies, they're not able to have any field clear. They don't have either chickening or weed spray, and it happens to be those zombies are usually the ones that are the hardest ones to make decks with, like Immorticia. Anyway, let's move on. There's going to be one more thing I would like to talk about removal, and that is water removal. In every single game, the 5th lane is always an aquatic lane, and you have to always be conscientious of that lane when you're building a deck. So it's nice to be able to put your own creatures in that lane. I'll show you some aquatic creatures that can be played. They don't have to be played in the water, but they can be played in the water. We'll start with Sea Shroom here. Sea Shroom, it's a 2/2, so the stats aren't good. Two cost card should really have more power than 2/2. The fact it's amphibious really makes up for it. This is a good card. You can stick it since it's amphibious, as you see, it means you can stick it in the water lane. You have to always have either some aquatic minions in your deck or some way to deal with your opponent's aquatic minions. And I'll tell you the reason why. If they can play a really strong aquatic minion, for example, let's say, I'll show you an example of Cattail. Cattail is a smarty. Here's Cattail. Yeah, this is a 3/2 that they'll play in the water on turn 3. If you have no way of dealing with this card, they play it and you just have nothing you can do to remove this card, nothing to do in the water lane. It'll do 3 damage again and again and again, and it'll put you way behind and probably eventually finish you off. So you either need an aquatic minion to counter this, or you need some cards that can just deal with the water lane. For example, if they play Cattail and you are a zombie, and we'll bring up some examples of some removal. If you are the crazy class, crazy class is easier, so you can actually play a plumber and get rid of that Cattail. Cattail has 3 attack, 2 health. You play this on the Cattail, so that's a good way of removing it. If it's a bigger card, you can use K-Explosion. This can hit this is a trick, so it can hit a zombie, it can hit a plant that they played in the water lane. Obviously field clear, like the chickening, things like this. Also, it affects every single lane, so this will also deal with the water lane. So you gotta really, every time you're building your deck, keep that water lane in mind and make sure you don't forget about it. Alright, now we're going to actually get into some actual decks. So the next thing I would like to talk about when you're building a deck, so we just talked about you have early game, you have your late game, you have removal. So now, okay, what kind of cards do I really want to put in every single deck? And before we get into anything fancy, the first thing I want to talk about is make sure that your cards that you're putting in your deck have good stats. They should have high attack and high health. That is the top priority usually, unless they have some amazing synergy that they work well together with other cards, but still never forget about stats. So in order to do this, let's start building this deck. I'm using the Smash since it's a very easy hero to use for beginner players. If you are offered the Smash in one of your early picks, definitely pick it. It's easy to use. So for example, let's look at some cards with some stats. Here, this is a baseball zombie. This costs 1, and it's a 1/1. Forget about it. You don't want to put as few cards like this in your deck. Now, here's a arm wrestler. It's 1. It costs 1, and not only does it have 2/2 of stats, it also has this power that whenever it's fronted by another minion, it grows. So that's a good stat. So let me tell you the lowdown on stats. Basically, if it costs 1, you want it to be about a 2/2. That's like a good stats for a 1-cost card. There are plenty of 1-cost cards like that in the game. Here's another example. It's just the dog. Dog Walker. It's a 1/2/2. Has a little trick to it. That's kind of an advanced strategy. If your card costs 2, you want the stats to be at least 2/3 or 3/2. Basically, you want the stats to equal 5. So, for example, Sumo Zombie. Here's a really, really good card. Yeah, it's 2/2/3, and to be able to move a plant also around comes really, really in handy. But even without that, it's a 2/2/3. That's considered to be decent cards. Once you get to the 3 slot. Yeah, so then basically from 3 and on, you want your stats to equal double the cost. So for example, the card costs 3, so you want the stats to equal 6, like a 3/3. I'll give you an example. This is a good example of a card. So not only is it a 1/1, but it gives a different zombie or itself, it gives it +2 health and +2 attack. So basically, what are its stats if you add them up is it's a 3/3, which means the stats equal 6 for 3. So this is a card with good statistics. When it comes to later, so let's say Smashing Gargantuar, this is fine. This is a good card because it costs 5 and the stats equal 10, plus it has Frenzy, which is just a added bonus. That's the first thing you want to do. So let's say we're building a deck. So I would say, no, we're not going to do Baseball Zombie. I'll put an Arm Wrestler. I have this deck sort of partly built, but I'll just show you. I put in a few Arm Wrestlers. I would put in, let's see, what is this? Conehead Zombie. 2 attack, 2 health, and armor. So it's a 2/3. Being 2 and 2/2 and 1 armor. Armor basically prevents 1 damage every single turn. It's actually slightly better than being 2/3 because let's say minions, for example, minions with 1 attack can actually do 0 damage to you no matter how many times they hit you. Okay, so we'll add one of those. That's okay. Sumo Zombie, sure, that's a great card. 2/3 plus it has a great ability. Let's see Dolphin Rider. So Dolphin Rider has low stats for its cost. It's cost 3. Its stats should really equal 6 at this point. Its stats only equal 5, but that's fine. It's still a very good card because it's amphibious. Amphibious sort of protects minions, so you can count amphibious as a point of health or 2, basically. So since it's sort of protected that you're able to amphibious put in the water lane, this is a decent card, so we'll stick one of these in the deck. Loudmouth, this is a fine card. Not only is it really a 3/3 worth of stats, but you have this option that you can either buff itself or buff another creature, so that's a good ability. We'll stick this. Okay, so that's kind of like an early game. We figured I'll show you what we have in this deck for early games. So let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to put in Camel Crossings. Camel Crossings are good. That's a nice little trick. It actually adds, I'll show you what this does. Add some health to all of your zombies. All your zombies get +2 health. So just think about it. This is a 1-cost card, and even affects, let's say, 2 zombies. So that's a 1-cost card that you got 4 points of stats out of. And obviously you can play this very often on full boards, and then you get 10 points of stats out of it. So this is, Camel Crossing is a really good card. Okay, so we're going to put in some, a little bit of 1-drops. You don't need 1-drops in every single deck. You definitely need 2-drops in every deck. But 1-drops are, it happens to work, so you put in 1-drops. But a lot of times it's just past turn 1. But we have 1-drops in this deck. Okay, so you have this. You're going to put in, we'll put in Conehead. Okay, how many early game cards do we have? 4, 8, 9, 10, 14. Pretty decent. Maybe we'll stick in one more just because we need one more. Let's put in Rolling Stone. That looks fine. A little bit of early removal. So we have the 15 base, the 15 early game cards. Pretty good early game. Let's see what we got here. The 3s. Got 4s, 5s. You want it to be on a good curve, you want to be building up your deck that you don't want it to be like you have cards that cost 1 or 2 and then like 3 costs there's like nothing, because what are you going to do on turn 3? You really want there to be a curve, meaning that you're covering appropriately every single cost with the right amount of cards. That really varies in this game from deck to deck. It's kind of hard to say, but you want heavy 2-drops and 3-drops are probably the most important. Those should be the 2 heaviest slots in your deck. For Conehead, this is a Buckethead. This has good stats. It's 3/4 plus armor, so its stats really, the armor counts as 1 stat, so it costs 4, and it really has 8 points, 7 points plus an armor, which is probably better than having 8 points of stats. So that's a good card. We would put some hard removal. We would put some field clear. We have weed spray, so always want some field clear. Probably stick a couple copies of this in. I like having three copies of weed spray in my decks. They are a rare card, so you have to get them. You can get a couple from your hero quests when you do those eventually. Monster Mash. What is this? Monster Mash is a card that it adds 2 attack and 2 health to every single zombie, so you can get a lot of value. I mean, if you have 4 creatures on the board, obviously this is a very circumstantial card. So you don't want to put 4 of these in the deck. Maybe you want to put just 1 or 2. And you keep on building up. Let's see how many more cards we have. For example, I'll give you an example of a card you never want to put in a deck because of its stats, and that is Haunting Zombie. I know we're all in the holiday spirits for Halloween, but this is a terrible, terrible card. Do not put this in any deck. People keep on coming to me and saying, I tried putting this card in my deck. I disagree. I can't imagine ever running this in deck. It costs 2 and it's 2/1. 2/1 is poor stats even for a card that would cost 1. And do you know what the special ability of this card is? Afterlife, meaning it gives you another Winds Destroy. You can play it a second time, which means it gives you this card in your hand that is a 2/1 and it also costs 2. So basically you play, this is a garbage card. It costs 2 and it gives you 2/1 and it gives you another garbage card in your hand. It's just horrible. Don't use this card. Maybe someday we can find some use for it, but in almost every single deck, unless it is exactly fits with some strategy of the deck, don't use it. This is Locust Swarm, so you want to put in some hard removal here. I'm going to lower this so you can kind of see more what's in the deck here. So we have our late game, the Smashing Gargantuars. Knights are pretty good. Good stats. Really strong card. Really hard card to take out, so we'll say that's our late game for now. Only have one Locust Swarm in the deck, so we're actually going to add 2 more of those. I think 3 would be the right amount. This is our nice hard removal. This card obviously destroys a zombie. And you can just add, I'm trying to use the cheaper cards. You can see I have Maniacal Laugh. Maybe this would be something I would add into a deck. Zombie gets 5 in Frenzy. It's a good finisher. Let's say Vitamin Z. I would add this. This is a nice trick. It's a 3 cost and it has 6 points of stats. So this would be a good card. So anyway, this would be a basic, if you want a really basic kind of low cost Smash deck, this is what I would advise for you. You can actually do pretty well with this deck early, if you're early in the ranks. So this is an example of the basic deck focusing on stats, not really focusing on any synergy. We're going to get to that in 1 second. So alright, let's move on. Next thing you want to think about when you are building a deck is synergy. So let me show you some examples, some easy examples of synergy. Here we'll go to the deck, to our collection for this. The definition of synergy means that you have 2 parts, and when they work together, their strengths are so much stronger than each of their individual strengths when they're alone. So that means that you can have cards in your deck that work very well together, that they end up strengthening each other. So I'll give you some really simple examples. Okay, Cat Lady. Yeah. Rare card. You can get a couple from your Brain Freeze quest if you want. This card gets +3 when you're playing another pet. So if you just look at this card without the special ability, it costs 1, it has 0 attack and 4 health. Terrible card, but if you're playing it in a deck that has a lot of pets, so then you have pet synergy in the deck. You can play a pet, and then that turn it becomes a 3/4. If you play a few pets, it becomes even stronger. Another card that has pet synergy, for example, would be the Zookeeper. Pets are difficult to play. I will explain later in this tutorial more about pet decks and how to build it, particularly with the Smash. But here's another card with pet synergy. Yeah, when you play another pet, all pets get 1, and that includes the Zookeeper. So if you play Zookeeper and then you play another card, you can read the text. See, it says Pet Zombie over here. You can read the text in all these little cards. There's some cards they just say Pet Zombie. A lot of them don't. For example, this one, it's just a Imp Zombie. Sometimes the fact it's an Imp Zombie makes a difference. So there are a lot of pets in the deck, and if you want to build a pet deck that's featuring a lot of pets, the pets end up working very well together, because not only can they be good cards by themselves, but they can help each other to grow and gain more attack, etc. I'll show you some more. I want to show you maybe one more for the zombies before we get to the plans. Here's a good one. For the crazy class, Unlife for the Party. Look at this guy. This gets +1/+1 when you play another zombie. So it starts off as a 1/1/1. Terrible stats, but this is a very good card, because if you play it correctly, it's a difficult card to play, but if you play correctly, it can end up growing. I've had games where Unlife the Party becomes 7/7. 7 attack, 7 health, or even bigger than that. So the synergy with Unlife for the Party would be this card right here. This would be an example. Disco Zombie. Really, any low-cost card would be a synergy with Unlife the Party. You play Unlife the Party, then you play another low-cost card, all in succession, and it buffs it up. This, when played, makes a 1/1 backup dancer. So even though, who cares, it's just a little extra 1/1 on the board, but that's a whole nother minion that is being played on the board. So, for example, if it's turn 4, which means you have 4 brains to spend, a great play, if you happen to have these 2 cards in your hand, a great play is playing first Unlife for the Party. You play on the board, now I have 3 left, then play Disco Zombie. So now this Unlife for the Party that costed 1 now has a 3 attack and 3 health, which for a 1-cost card is amazing, and it'll just keep on growing if they can't destroy it right away. So that's another example of synergy. Always look for synergy in your decks, and for that I will go to let's look at an entirely new deck right now. I will show you a synergy deck, and this is another. I'm using this deck right now because it's really good for early players, and that is going to be Solar Flare, the Sunflower hero. So this will be the basic deck. I'll show you the strike through deck. I'll show you what strike through is right now. For example, Fume Shroom. Yeah, this is strike through, which means usually when you play a plant, if there's a zombie in the same lane as it, it'll hit the zombie, will not hit the opponent. This hits the zombie and it hits the opponent. That's what strike through does. I'll show you guys just in case you don't know. This is hits the zombie here, and it basically strikes through everything in that lane. If you have a lot of strike through cards in a deck, so this is strike through. Bloomerang, see anything with a little blue symbol by its attack, that means that it's strike through. Bloomerang, this also has strike through. This one is 3 attack and 3 health. Power Flower, of course, more strike through. Laser Beam, the big strike through card, 4 attack, 6 health. It's expensive. All of these cards work very well together because if you keep on strike through, and they're really just trying to trade their minions against yours in order to destroy them, you're eventually just going to win, because even though the 2 minions are going to be trading against each other and attacking each other, you're also going to be striking through and hitting your opponent's face and depleting their health until you win. This deck has more synergy. Look at this synergy here. Yeah, we have Shroom for 2, which is a mushroom plant. Good stats, by the way. It costs 1, and the stats, if you add them all up, are 2, 2. So, very good card. The fact that it's 2 separate minions also is very, very good. This is one of the strongest 1-drops in the game, in my opinion. Then we have Buff Shroom. So once you play your Shroom for 2s, you can buff them up with a Buff Shroom. Buff Shroom also synergizes with Fume Shroom. So now this card, the Fume Shroom, actually has 2 synergies in this deck. First of all, it's strike through, so it fits with that theme, and also it gets buffed up by the Buff Shroom, because if you have the Fume Shroom on, Fume Shroom is a mushroom, and you play Buff Shroom afterwards, now the Fume Shroom will gain +1 attack, +1 health, will become a 3-2 instead of 2-3. We also have a few Punish Shrooms in this deck. Punish Shroom is when a mushroom is destroyed to do 2 damage to a random zombie or to the zombie hero. So you can basically swarm with a lot of little mushrooms, you're putting them all on the board, and the Punish Room you play on the board. When your mushrooms start getting destroyed, they start destroying your opponent's minions as well. So this deck also, we have two big removal cards. Those are Squash. This is a finisher, Grapes of Wrath. It's not necessary for this deck. This is a good deck. We have this is an interesting card, Berry Angry. This is actually the only deck I would actually run 2 Berry Angry. Some decks I would run 1. This is also synergy. This has synergy with everything in the deck. All plants get +2. The reason is because, first of all, Shroom for 2s, you're playing all these little minions. The mushrooms, if they're played well, they're typically very swarmy, so they get all this extra attack. It'll trigger on, let's say, both of the Shroom for 2s. Plus, Berry Angry is very good with the strike through, because you have strike through for 3, and now you give it a little extra attacks, and now it's going to be strike through for 5, so it's just going to be really piling on all the damage. You have a little bit of field clear in this deck. That's nice. Cherry Bombs, destroying things, and we have small removal, and this is our actually only answer to the water lane too. So this deck really, this is a very high ranked deck, the strike through Solar Flare. This incorporates all of the aspects that we really needed. We have first of all, this does 3 damage. Sometimes in key points in the game, if they have a little minion you want to destroy it, they have a big minion that's damaged, it can finish it off. And if they play a water lane minion like that dolphin that I showed you before, so this is a great answer to destroying that dolphin, even if it's in the water lane, especially because Solar Flare has no minions that can actually go into the water, no amphibious minions. So you definitely need to keep track of that. Having removal and be able to remove the water lane. So this is a great deck. If you're a beginner player, I would suggest trying to build this deck as close as you can. You might not have all the cards, but the cards that are expensive in this deck are actually the least necessary, like the Grapes of Wrath. You can have less laser beams if you don't have 4 of these. The Cherry Bombs are nice, but they're really not necessary. Even the Punish Rooms are not really necessary in this deck. They definitely add a lot of synergy, but alright. And that's a wrap. I would actually take out this Metal Petal and put in a 4th Bloomerang. I don't know why I have a Metal Petal, so we'll remove this. And we will put in a Bloomerang. Bloomerang is more synergetic. It does strike through damage. Okay, so that's a really good deck. Now I want to get into some more advanced strategies. So far, let's just recap what we've done. We've talked about having good early game, having good late game, having good removal, make sure the stats of your cards are good, and make sure your deck has synergy. So number 6, I'm going to talk about having an actual clear strategy to your deck. And this is, I've found a lot of people they're good at making decks with synergy, but it's definitely a higher level, and a much better decks is when you have a strategy. What is a strategy? A strategy means you're trying to think, how am I going to win? Every single card basically in my deck, or at least most of the cards in my deck, should be coming towards one common cause, and that is our win condition. How does this deck beat our opponent and deplete all 20 points of their health? That's obviously the goal by the end. So I'm going to explain these one at a time, some different strategies you can have, and for each of these strategies there's many decks you can build with each of these particular strategies. So here we go. The first strategy, which is probably the most basic, is tempo. And for that I will show you the most tempo deck in this game, and that is one of the strongest decks in the game, and that is Gravestone Neptuna. Let me show you this deck. This deck, anyone who's played this deck or has watched the stream before knows that this Gravestone Neptuna is amazing. Okay, so what does tempo mean? Tempo means that you get ahead of your opponents on turn 1. Turn 2, you try to get a little bit more ahead. You creep a little bit more ahead. Turn 3, you even creep more ahead. 4 and 5, and eventually, it's a slow, gradual process, but eventually, you're getting your board, your minions on your board are going to just be more numerous and be stronger than your opponent's minions. And what's going to happen is eventually they're going to run out of cards and not be able to counter the minions you're playing anymore. Or you're going to end up, just because your minions are just stronger and more numerous on the board, you're going to end up doing so much damage to them that they're going to die. So this is how this deck works. This is currently the best one-drop card in the game. It's Headstone Carver, and this is such a tempo card. Not only does it have pretty good stats for a one-drop, it's a 1/3, so it has the 4 points. For a one-drop, you want 4 points of stats. It also has this ability, which is insane. Every zombie that pops subsequently out of a gravestone gets +1/+1. So you put 4 Headstone Carvers in this deck, and you want 8 cards. Whenever you're running a gravestone deck, you want 8, at least 7, but preferably 8 turn 2 gravestones. So you want to do is to play Headstone Carver on 1, and Sumo Zombie is the next best play on 2. Think about this now. Turn 2, if this pops out of a gravestone, this card has 3/4 worth of stats, 3 attack and 4 health after it's buffed by that Headstone Carver and gets the extra 1/1. So you're coming on turn 2 and you're playing, usually turn 2 plays, your plants are going to be playing a card that has, let's say, 2 attack and 3 health, and this Sumo Zombie is going to have 3 attack and 4 health. If those two gets matched up, your opponent's minion dies and you still have a nice big card on the board, a couple nice big cards on the board. Then turn 3 you play another one, let's say for example Smelly Zombie. This card popping out, if the Headstone Carver is still alive, which it might be, because first of all it's hard to take out, second of all the Sumo Zombie could have prevented it from dying. So then now you have a 3/5 on the board. A card that would just cost 3 and just be 3/5 would be amazing. Just so strong. And this also has Deadly, which just makes it better. You basically, with this deck, you build up your board, and then you come in and you play Monster Mash. So now you have all these minions. They're kind of teetered and tattered. Maybe some of them have taken damage. Maybe one of them still your Headstone Carver, so it's a little weak. You come with Monster Mash, and now your cards have tons of attack, tons of health. All your zombies get +2/+2. The Surprise Gargantuar, not only in this deck does it have synergy because it's a gravestone, so this will pop out of a gravestone with the Headstone Carver being a 6/7, which is incredible stats for a 5-drop. It also is a finisher. You can move it to a different lane right when it pops out of the gravestone. That works out really well. We have our field clear in this deck. That is the Weed Spray, is very important. Another great thing in this deck is the Pogo Zombie. This provides us, so our big removal in this deck are Smelly Zombies, which are deadly, Pogo Zombies, which bounce. There is some more synergy in this deck because after you play the Pogo Zombies, when they pop out of a gravestone, they bounce one of your opponent's minions. So if you happen to play Pogo on 4, and then play Mixed Up Gravedigger on 5, so the Pogo Zombie will go back into its gravestone, pop out, and bounce another zombie. We're running a king in this deck. The king's not necessary, so you don't have it. This is, in my opinion, the best deck in the game. In terms of water lane, we do have a little bit of water presence, so we are running 2 Fishy Imps. Also happens to be our superpower launches a zombie into the lane. You always want to keep track in your deck. For example, this counts as a water minion, because you have one of our powers. So you can really count that as having another water card in your deck. So if I would normally be running 3, I would run 2 because I have Octopus. This could maybe be counted as a little bit of hard removal. A lot of times when you're making your deck and crunching the numbers, you want to keep track of what that hero's powers do, and those will basically count as one of your hard removal cards, or one of your water lane cards, or something like that. So, alright, that's Gravestone Neptune. Now I'm going to show you one more tempo deck. So tempo, you're staying ahead of your opponent. I will show you one more tempo deck for the plants, and this is my favorite plant deck. It is going to be Tempo Grass Knuckles. Here it is. Tempo Grass Knuckles. Grass Knuckles, a very, very strong hero. And this is how you tempo Grass Knuckles. So, again, you're trying to just get ahead, get more ahead. So let's say turn 1, typical play would be the P-Pod. It starts as a 1-1, starts off really weak, but if your opponent doesn't have a way of dealing with it, then it becomes a 2-2. Every single start of each turn, next turn will be a 3-3, 4-4. You're getting ahead of your opponent. Turn 2, you want to make a really, in this deck, for example, you want to make a really, really strong turn 2 play. So that's either going to be Black Eyed Pea, which has really good stats, 2-3, and it gets buffed every time your opponent plays a trick. Sea Shroom. I'm running 4 Sea Shrooms in this deck just because there's a lot of people playing Toxic Waste Imp decks right now, so you want to be able to play lots of Sea Shrooms to counter. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the section about deck adjustments. Juggernaut, really strong. So you're playing this. You're playing all these really strong 2-drops, particularly Juggernaut and Black Eyed Pea on turn 2. And then turn 3, you really want one of your minions to survive until turn 3, because turn 3, that's when it really comes in. Look at the stats of this card, Buff Shroom. You want to really play either Buff Shroom or Fertilizer on turn 3. Then that plant just grows even more and even more. A plant gets +2. The total stats of this card, by the way, are 7. So for a 3-drop having 7 stats, it's 2 + 1, +2 + 2 is 7. Really, really good. You got to really try to focus in this deck and making one of your minions survive coming into turn 3, so you can either Grow Shroom it or Fertilizer it. He's still building up. This Muscle Sprout is very growy. He has a lot of synergy in this deck because of all the little cards. We are running these lots of little cards. So this is like the unlife of the party. Every single time you play a plant, it grows. Particularly in this deck, a great synergy, by the way, is Muscle Sprout. Playing Muscle Sprout on turn, instead on turn 3, where it usually dies on turn 3. If they just have something that can do 2 damage in their hand, it can really get you. Wait till turn 4 and play it together with a Torchwood, and stick the Torchwood in front of it. This Torchwood, it's typically used that P's behind to get +2, so you typically want to stick it in front of a P, but you can also stick that in front of the Muscle Sprout. So the Muscle Sprout, what will it be on turn 4? It'll be a 4 attack, 3 health. It'll be protected by this Torchwood in front of it. By the time they can take out this Torchwood and start trying to kill the Muscle Sprout, the next turn you just keep on swarming. We're running a Bananasaurus Rex. It's not necessary, but it's really good. It has a bonus attack. It benefits a lot from being buffed. So does the one repeater that we're running in this deck. If you would be able to stick a Fertilizer or Grow Shroom and grow that up, that's fine. Basically building up, running the 1 Potted Powerhouse, and basically everything in this deck grows. So the Potted Powerhouse ends up becoming really, really beastie. Running one Potted Powerhouse is usually the correct amount for most decks. This is the late game, and the finisher in this deck is the Tough Beats. Right on turn 5 when you play this, a lot of times there's huge boards, out, and this usually ends up having at least, besides for the 6 attack, 1 health, 1 armor, it usually ends up having about 6 attack, average about 5 health and 1 armor, which being is obviously really, really good stats for a 5-drop. It works well in this deck just because of your minions seem to stay alive a lot. There is some more synergies in this deck. The problem that Grass Knuckles has is big removal. There's no real big removal, so that's why we're running these Crocs. These Crocs are the big removal cards. It costs 4 and only does 4 damage, but when this dies, so it explodes and does another 4 damage. So that is the big removal in this deck. We're only running 2. Could be running a 3rd one. Other removal cards we have in this deck. Bong Choi is a small removal card. You can use this to do a little damage to your opponent. You usually want to use this to remove one of their creatures. So the fact it costs 1 and can do 3 damage to one of your opponent's zombies is really, on the turn it's played. It gets a little extra attack, so that's really good. We have this as a small removal card, particularly to counter Headstone Carver. Headstone Carver costs 1 and has 3 health. if you can take out Headstone Carver the turn it's played, you definitely want to. And basically, the only normal plant card that can do that is this one, Bong Choi. I'm running just because there's a lot of Gravestone decks in the meta. This is removal. This can be small removal, can be big removal. If you play earlier in the game, it'll be small removal. If you keep it to the late game, this can sometimes take a huge Gravestone out, like a Surprise Gargantuar, and can be very effective. We're running these two cards just because there's been a lot of Headstone Carver decks. That deck I showed you before. So this is example of tempo. You play, you get more ahead on turn 3, you get more on turn 4, and they just fall behind. And the win rate of this deck is insane. It's about 90%. So, alright. That's what tempo is. Next thing I want to show you is Zoo. And in order to show you Zoo, I'm going to go to my favorite Zoo deck. It is Professor Brainstorm, but we fondly call it Professor Brainswarm. All these decks, by the way, that I'm showing you, I will include links to them on YouTube. Except for maybe the very first basic deck. I don't have a YouTube video about that. All the rest of them I will have links in the description so you can check out how these decks actually play out in real games. Now I'm just describing exactly what the strategy is because we're talking about how to build decks. If you want to see how they play out, these decks are all really, really good. You can check out their respective YouTube videos that I've made in the past. So here's Professor Brainswarm. And this is going to teach us what a Zoo deck. A Zoo deck in this context, I know it might mean a little bit of a different thing, varying from game to game. A Zoo game in this game is having a really, really low curve. You want tons of small, swarmy minions, and what better to do it with than with Paparazzi and Unlife of the Party. Unlife of the Party, like we explained before, grows every single time you play a small minion. Paparazzi, it grows every single time you play a small trick. So we have tons of small minions, small tricks in this deck. The Beam Me Up actually buffs both of these, because not only is it a trick, it also spawns a minion. So if you happen to have, it's happened to me many times that you actually have an Unlife of the Party and a Paparazzi on the board, and you play Beam Me Up, it'll buff both of them. We have the Disco Zombies. The curve in this deck is quite low. We only have two really cards that cost 5 or more, and we just have these as finishers. This is Unlife of the Party, and we have one of these. So it's really this also the Gentleman Zombie. I would probably mix up this deck a little bit. The Gentleman Zombie just got nerfed, so I would actually stick in another Disco Zombie in this deck right now. You're going to run out of cards very, very quickly using this deck. The reason is because you really don't have anything in terms of late game. The expensive cards are like chickening. You have a couple of late game cards, so that's why it's really necessary in this deck to have Kite Flyers, and we have running one Funded Razor. We are running a little bit of removal. The Valkyrie is really, really good in this deck. Every single time one of your minions dies, so this gets +2 attack, so eventually this Valkyrie sometimes ends up being insane as 10, 12, 14, huge amounts of attack. After all, you're just playing all these little tiny creatures on the board. This is interesting. This is not actually my typical Professor Brainstorm deck. The bonus attacks are good in this deck. There should actually be the thing that's missing from this deck right now is a Chimney Sweep. Anyway, there's a lot of different variants for this deck, so you can build it as you like. It happens to be that making Zoo decks with Professor Brainstorm are especially good because 2 of his powers, his superpower and telepathy, so 50% of his powers, draw more cards, so you're less likely to run out of cards when you're running a deck like this. I have Chopper just for the finish and just because bonus attacks are good in this deck. So this is really good synergy because after you're swarming all your little cards around, you play Orchestra Conductor and buff them all up. This is a nice Zoo deck. I will show you now a Zoo deck for the plants. Let's go back here, and for this one we will use Green Shadow. Green Shadow is probably my favorite Zoo deck. Where is the Green Shadow Zoo? So Green Shadow has 2 pretty good starting strategies, synergies, let's say. One is one of the best in the game, which is freezing. You have your Snowdrops, Iceberg Lettuce, Snow Peas, Chili Peppers, running a couple of Winter Squashes just to provide the hard removal in this deck. one Snapdragon for field clear, but you just notice the curve in this deck is really, really low. The advantage of a deck like this is that you usually almost always get an amazing starting hand, and you can really take them over. So in order to make up for the lack of late game in this deck, we have 3 Flourishes, which just drawing cards in this deck is really, really good. It is synergy with the Bananasaurus Rex, but it's not necessary. Bananasaurus Rex gains attack and health every single time you draw a card. So this is a very decent deck. It's the Zoo deck. This deck, I actually, at the time I'm recording this video, I do not have this yet on YouTube, but I will be uploading it sometime soon, so you can keep an eye out for that. As soon as I do, I will put it in the description. So again, low, swarmy, and you know, the the muscle sprouts are particularly good in this deck. You could even add a 3rd and a 4th one maybe into this deck, just because of since all the small cards that we're running in this deck, tons of 1-drops. I mean, having this many 1-drops it's very, very few. It's a lot of 1-drops for a deck, so those things every single time you play one of these little minions buffs the muscle sprout, and this is a good deck. Alright, let's get on to a next strategy. This is going to be strategy number 3 that I'm going to talk about right now. Is going to be a ramp deck. So let's go back to zombies for a second, and I will show you the ramp ZMech deck. This is a deck that also I have not yet uploaded to YouTube. I've done this in the stream before, and it was quite effective. So where is the ZMech ramp? Here it is. A ramp deck, the strategy. Again, I'm telling you what it means in Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. In other card games it means something maybe slightly different, but in this game a ramp deck means the whole point of the early game is really just to push and try to get to that late game, and you have really, really heavy, tons of really strong late game cards in your deck. Just look at how many late game cards we're running here. I'm just going to start counting at 5, even though we could start counting at 4. I'll start counting at 5. We have 1, we have the Foot Soldier, 4 of these, so we're at 5. Monster Mash is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Having 12 cards that cost 5 or more, you're going to have to really have a lot of things in your deck that will help you get there, get to the late game, and that's how we've basically structured the entire early game. The great thing about ZMech in terms of building a ramp deck is that he has these, both the Weed Spray and the Chickening, so he has so many different opportunities for field clear, running 3 of each, so having 6 field clear cards basically obliterates your opponent's early game. We are running Flag Zombies in this deck. Flag Zombies, they are very good in a ramp deck. They help you ramp up and get to those higher cost minions earlier, because all your zombies end up costing 1 less. You don't want to put too many Flag Zombies out on the field, because then they can kind of clog up your lanes and you won't actually have any place on the field to play the strong ones. But we had a lot of success with this deck. There's a lot of variations to this deck. You basically, at one point I was running a few of these cards, the Fireworks Zombies. This is when you play it, it does 1 damage to all plants and zombies. I found that it was actually easier with the Landscapers. This also sort of just takes the breath out of your opponent. It's not a very strong early game card, but it just weakens whatever your opponent's playing, especially good against strike through minions. So you basically clear them out early on, and you just come in and play another late game card, and another one. If you can really get to turn 5 with this deck, you're probably going to win. You just have to make sure that you don't get beat early, which we have all the necessary tools in this deck to not get beat early. The one thing ZMech is missing is hard removal. It doesn't have any cards that really destroy one of your opponent's minions. So so that's why we're running these bombs. These bombs are big removal. You know, if they play a minion, it looks like ridiculous. Stick a bomb in front of it and let's see it survive. You know, 6 damage. We're also running 3 cakes. Explosion. So this is a ramp deck. Alright, here we go. We are going to, I'm going to show you a ramp deck. This is maybe lesser of a ramp deck, but it's still a very, very great deck. I'll show you the Ramp Rose deck. Where is Ramp Rose? Okay, this is another ramp. I call this a ramp deck because really the way this deck is built, even though it does have a strong early game, you're basically trying to use your early game just to push to get to that late game and finish them off with your strike through. So start off with your freezing, another ramp deck here. Start off with your freezing. You have your snowdrops, snow peas, iceberg lettuce, chili peppers. We are running these cards, which are actually very good in a ram style deck. The 3/3 counters a lot. Don't underestimate the power of this card, especially because we're running Briar Rose in this deck. Briar Rose is not necessary, something I put in the end. We have 3 Snapdragons, which again, that's the field clear. You want these Snapdragons to come. Turn 4 is kind of the pivotal turn. You want these cards, these Snapdragons in particular, to try to really blast everything your opponent's playing out of the water. We used to run Electric Reed in this deck, which is this card over here. I took them out, and I might put them in again, because it seems like there's a lot of people playing Imps, and this is a really good card against Imps. Again, it's just a field cleared card. You're not going to end up doing a lot of damage with your Electric Reeds. It's just to prevent your opponent from swarming you down. You really just want to use, sometimes you can take over if you get a really good starting hand, you can take over with your Snowdrops, etc. But you're basically using the early game to push towards the late game, and once you get to turn 4 and 5, you start Bloomeraming, Power Flower, Laser Beam, you have your Squashes, running one Brainana. It's also not necessary, but it's a good thing just to make your opponent kind of run out of answers, you know, so you won't be able to remove your cards. You're basically, the mindset of this deck is to push the late game, and particularly for Rose, this is good because 2 of her powers are super late game. So this has Synergy, Big Chill, obviously with the freezing. These are very late game powers. Turning something into a 1/1 is not a good idea if that card costed them 1s. Now you're spending they spent 1, you spend 1, they still end up with a minion on the board. Transmogrify and Godify you want to use on a huge card. So this is just a lot of really heavy removal. It's the reason we're only running 2 Squashes, because we have 2 out of 4 of our powers are really heavy removal. So when it comes to you know, this Ramp Rose deck fighting out another deck in the late game, this Ramp Rose deck will probably win because of all of the really heavy cards, and it's also really good against in the late game if you're running a Briar Rose in this deck, because the little flowers then can take things out. We have Morning Glories in this deck just to pad the early game. It's just we kind of stick it there, just the Morning Glory, to basically to counter one of your opponent's minions they play early on or finish it off. We basically use this as doing 2 damage, but it also obviously works later in the game. It gets a little extra attack and a little extra health, and it's synergy with the Power Flowers. Super synergy in this deck. It's synergy with this is flowers, and the Briar Rose is a flower, so it synergizes with the Briar Rose. When Briar Rose is on the field, every time a flower gets hurt, so that the zombie that hurt it gets destroyed. Snowdrop is a flower, so that also works with Briar Rose and with the healing ability of Power Flower, and Snapdragon is also a flower. So this deck obviously has tons of synergy in many ways, and this has always been one of my favorite plants to play with. Alright, so that is what a ramp is. Now I'm going to explain the last strategy I'm going to talk to. There are more strategies than what I'm going to talk about today. The last one I'm going to explain here in the video is aggro. So aggro is basically you're building a deck that you're trying to hit your opponent's face again hard, just putting everything you got into the basically first 5 turns of the game and really trying to just make them totally get overwhelmed by you. There are different types, very different types of aggro decks. The first aggro deck I will show you is going to be this deck right here. This is definitely aggro, a very aggressive deck. It is going to be the Smash Pet deck. This is an amazing deck. The reason I'm referring to this as an aggro deck, even though you can kind of look at it as a tempo deck, but I refer to this as an aggro deck just because usually when you're winning, it's your cat ladies and your zookeepers just totally decimating them, and then maybe just you know, doing a lot of damage to your opponent, and then maybe smashing your Gantry just coming in for the finish. So in this deck, we are running the cat ladies. This is a difficult deck to play, so really maybe try to watch the Smash Pet video that I put out. It's called Camel Clutch. This is a difficult deck to play. Basically, cat lady gets extra attack every single time you play a pet. Zookeeper adds attack to all your pets, and you're just trying to set up the board that you have so many of your pets hitting your opponent's face, and they're all getting more and more attack just because of the Zookeeper, that you just do so much damage to them, and then you just come in with a finisher, which a lot of times is just smashing Gargantuar. It's kind of like the perfect finisher in this game. Turn 5 in this game is really when you're going for the kill. So it's definitely a really aggressive deck, and you know, Maniacal Laugh on a on one of your minions is also just a great finisher. You need finishers in this deck because a lot of times your pets run out of heat. Camel Crossing is obviously the key card in this deck. That's why we call this the Camel Clutch deck. It gives all of your minions a little bit extra health, so they keep on surviving, they keep on hitting face, make them more immune to your opponent's field clear. This is a great deck. So this is a good deck here. I will show you one more aggro deck, and this is the next deck I'm going to show you is going to be Captain Combustible. So I'll show you an aggro plant deck. This is a deck that we had so much success with during the stream. I have not yet uploaded that YouTube video, but I will be coming in the future, and this is called Captain Face. This is a totally different strategy for an aggressive deck, but it's still definitely aggro. This is a phase deck. A phase deck is that you're trying to hit your opponent's face every single turn. That is, you're just basically ignoring your opponent's minions, not trying to make trades with them for sure. Basically removing your opponent's minions, clearing up the lanes, and just attacking your opponent again and again until you win. The power that helps minions do this is called Anti-Hero. Anti-Hero, so this costs 1, but it does 3 every single time it's hitting your opponent's face. Whenever it's hitting it has only 1 attack and 1 health, but when it's hitting heroes, it has 3 attack. So you have this, you have the high attack of the Wild Berry. Placement of this is key. It moves to another random lane. We are running the Poison Ivy. We do have to have a lot of removal in this deck because your opponent starts clogging all their lanes with minions. You have to have ways of getting rid of them. So we are running Berry Blast to do that. We are also running Sweet Potatoes, 2 Sweet Potatoes, because that when you play the Sweet Potato, it moves one of your opponents out of the way. So if you have a really strong card that you want to hit your opponent's face with, play Sweet Potato, moves whatever's blocking out of the way, and I'll just keep on hitting face. These are really, really good. The Whip Vines have been in this deck. This is actually the only deck I run Whip Vines in. Have been excellent in this deck. Not only does it have good stats, it's a 5/5/5. It does 5 attacks, so it fits in with the theme of a face deck. It's a hefty amount of damage to be doing on turn 5. The fact is moving another minion out of the way. Also, it not only will, let's say this do 5 damage the turn, but it'll also make one of your other minions hit your opponent's face that turn, and you basically just try to deplete them from their 20 health as soon as possible. Running 2 Repeating Moss, together with the 3 Fertilizer and the Superpower, the Repeating Moss ends up doing a lot of damage and is a great finisher. We're running a couple Berry Blasts, so we definitely have enough tricks in this deck to justify this. We're running Plant Food in this deck, also the only deck I run Plant Food in. 1/1 does a bonus attack, so this just keeps your minions alive on the board. This works very, very well with particularly with this card with the Wild Berry. Wild Berry, if you play Plant Food on Wild Berry, it'll become a 5/2 and also do 5 damage, so it'll clear that lane and then hit for again 5 that turn. And I will be putting out, this was an awesome, awesome deck. Big finish in this deck is the Poison Oak. Rarely get chances to use this, but if you can pull it off, it does 9 damage to your opponent's face. So Cherry Bomb is very important in this deck actually, because a lot of times in order to get those last few points of damage necessary in, you need to get rid of your opponent's minions. So this could actually clear up a few lanes in order to just be able to finish them off. Really, really good card. Bananosaurus Rex also does tons of face damage. You basically want to play this dry, and it'll start doing bonus attacks and growing your opponent's face, and that'll be really good. The Sour Grapes are here just for field clear also, because this deck would be weak against a very swarmy deck. They're playing a lot of small creatures, so Sour Grapes helps get rid of those. And alright, that's aggro deck. There is a face deck, particularly Face Infinity. I will be, that was actually the original video I uploaded. I actually took it off of YouTube just because it was kind of low quality. There is a Face Infinity deck which I will be trying sometime soon in the stream, and then I will upload that to YouTube. So Infinity has a similar strategy where you have a lot of really hard-hitting cards, and then you basically bounce all your opponent's minions out of the way until or use smoke bombs to adjust your lanes until you win. So those are the 4 strategies I wanted to cover here in this tutorial. It is Tempo, Zoo, Ramp, and Aggro. The last thing, so I'll say that this will be number 7 in terms of building decks, is you want to be able to make adjustments. So if you're playing a deck and you see that every game that you lose, just think to yourself, why did I lose that game? Which turn did I fall behind? Let's say I fell behind on turn 3. They made a play. I really didn't have a turn 3 cards. If that happens to you enough that you don't end up having a turn 3 play, it means you probably need more turn 3 plays, and you need more cards that cost 3 in your deck. If you feel like you're losing in the early game, so maybe you need more early game. If you feel like you're losing in the late game, that you're not able to keep up with your opponent late game, maybe you need stronger cards in the late game or more card draw. Always make adjustments to your deck. I'm going to show you a couple examples of very specific adjustments that I would make. For example, this is a adjustment I made. I'll bring up my Grass Knuckles Tempo Grass Knuckles deck, because that's actually a recent deck that we've made some really smart adjustments to. So here's Grass Knuckles Tempo. Originally, I did not have 4 Sea Shrooms in this deck. This will just be one example here. The 4 Sea Shrooms, that's a lot for a deck to have 4 Sea Shrooms. The stats aren't really that good enough to have 4. The reason I'm running 4 is because a lot of opponents were running Toxic Waste Imp, which is a really, really strong card. It gives all your opponents imps deadly, and they can basically destroy the minions. This deck relies heavily on growing strong minions with Fertilizer and Growshroom, etc. And all these little tiny imps that they're playing will actually take out one of your really grown minions. So we really need to take out Toxic Waste Imp at all costs, and that's the reason why I made this adjustment. I put in the 4 Sea Shrooms. Other adjustment I did make to this deck is, since Gravestone decks are really, really strong, like the Gravestone Neptuna deck I showed you earlier. So we put in 3 Bonk Choys, because if they play Headstone Carver, play Bonk Choi right against it, and it'll take out the Headstone Carver and prevent them from getting ahead. Also, the Grave Busters end up good in very key situations against, particularly against Gravestone decks, but almost every zombie is going to be running some kind of Gravestone. So running 2 in a deck is, especially in the meta right now, is a really good idea. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. That is all for how to build a deck. The next tutorial I will be making is going to be how to make smart plays. We're actually going to go into the game, and I'm going to try to explain some really nitty-gritty how to make really good plays in the game of Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, and maybe tell you about some mistakes that I see a lot of people make. So thank you for watching. All of the decks I use in the tutorial have either been recorded already or on YouTube, or I will be recording them shortly. So you can keep your eye on the description for all those decks. I hope this helps you. I hope you enjoy. You can make just awesome decks, even with very inexpensive cards, even for new players. So alright, thanks everyone for watching. This is Fry. Peace.